Thank you, Dr. Mol, for joining me for this ECPS COMTOG project interview. I guess we'll start off with introducing yourself and your field of study, please.
Yeah. So my name is Angus Mol. I have a background in archaeology. That's where really a lot of this interest originally sprang from. But after that, I quickly realized that there is a lot of working with the past, just as archaeologists are working with the past, happening in the present right now, particularly in digital media and digital platforms. And my own passion together with that was games. So that's how I came into that as an archaeologist who thought there's actually a lot to do with archaeology and games. And from that, being part of the Leiden University Center for Digital Humanities and the Leiden University Center for the Arts and Society, I evolved into something a little bit more like a digital heritage meets game studies scholar myself. And in that sense, it's the trajectory that I'm going through is perhaps a little bit akin to the field that I'm also part of. It would be wrong to say that there's just one field, but I always speak of a field or fields at the intersection of the past and play, or a bit more specific, the past and video games. And that is a field that is very dynamic. It's very young still. A lot of early career researchers are in there. A lot of people that are very also motivated by by a desire to change academic and other practices as well. So you'll see people in this field from museology, history, archaeology, political sciences. It's a big hodgepodge, but the one thing that they all share is that play can actually positively power our experience of the past in the present.
Amazing. Yeah. So a sort of sentiment of interdisciplinarity exists in this field and is very strong there.
Yeah.
You mentioned that this is a dynamic field and you have your own project. Can you tell me a bit more about the Playful Time Machines project that you're leading?
Yeah, for sure. So I was, as part of this involvement in this field, I got particularly interested in the experience of the past. So there's a lot of things that are happening in this field. There's a lot of critical scholarship of games, for example, but I was particularly interested in how people actually experience the past in a game. And that is resulted in a project that's going to start soon. It's going to start in January when we're recording this. It's not just started yet, but it really plays on a shared interest that I've developed as well, together with people from the Value Foundation, sort of a informal research project that became its own foundation that really looks at experiences of the past in the present. So that's what the whole project Playtime, for short, Playful Time Machines, will do as well. And we're really taking their this general sense of what is happening in these games is very impactful. It's also very complex, both as a social and a cultural phenomenon, and also as a an economic phenomenon as well, right? There's lots of things that morph into this particular project, and we're going to look at that using by now pretty old already, but I still think as a basic foundation, very useful framework. That's the mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics framework that has already been around in game studies and game design since the early 2000s. And we're really going to look at, so this is oftentimes used for how to make games fun, for example, how to design games that are fun, but we're really going to look at the mechanics, the dynamics, and the aesthetics of the past in games to really get a broad and foundational basis, both in terms of data and methodology. So we're using lots of a mixed methods approach here in terms of qualitative and quantitative data to really get a bottom line understanding of what is actually happening when we experience the past in games.
Super interesting.
Good to hear.
Yeah. So we're gonna, you're talking about the way that video games, are both a social but also economic sort of phenomenon that's occurring in sort of pop and cultural and society. And you sort of touched upon this, but video games based around historical events or historical periods, exist on a wide range of genres. You have your first-person shooters, your strategy games, and role-playing games. And then the sort of the extent of historical accuracy, as we can understand it, sort of also widely vary.
Right.
Are there any trends you may have identified in your studies on the sort of the emphasis on research and accuracy in these games?
Mhm. Yeah, within historical games, both I think in terms of academics interested in this, at least at first, and as well as game developers interested in this, accuracy, or what I personally like to speak about, because I think it reflects a little bit better what is going on in practice, is authenticity, this feeling of being in an authentic past. That's, I think, this is a hypothesis, this is something we're going to be testing. That's really more what is happening on the level of the players, right? I think it's also what's happening in terms of game design. It's not, accuracy is part of authenticity, right? But it's not necessarily the case when you're designing a game that sometimes games are designed to be as accurate as possible. Those would be simulator style games, right? And of course, a lot of game genres have aspects of simulation in them, right? RPGs, especially historical ones, there has to be a sense that some of these things are accurate, but in a real historical sense, that accuracy is not, it's not a given, right? So it's very much what feels accurate for players, and also in that sense, what do game designers and other game makers think actually should be in that game to make things feel accurate. Sometimes that is for entertainment purposes. Sometimes that's because they have a particular message, right, to impart, and they know that that message is actually served by being authentic, by being honest and true, or at least feeling that way to people that are playing that message. And what you see in the scholarly side of things is that there still has, for a long time, especially when people first entered this sort of area of study, they're very interested in, well, that game's not accurate because I know from having studied classical Greece or extensively the colonial period, that that's not really what happened. And that's from a scholarly perspective, vested within traditional disciplines that study the past. It's a very understandable question, but in a way, it's the wrong question to ask, or it's even the wrong critique, you could say, to give to people that are playing and making games, because it's not across the board something that they're interested in. They're interested in being in an authentic past, and that has elements of accuracy in it, but it's never to the level that people that are actually passionate about that particular region or place are actually know that that level will be at. And you see that even in games that sort of wear this idea of accuracy and authenticity on their sleeves, for example, the Assassin's Creed series, you see that even there are places where with all the attention and care and love that is given to the past in these games, there's still places that are not accurate, or that are, where they have to make things up because there's simply no answer. So in that sense, it's this idea of accuracy is a very, in itself, a very dynamic thing and a very perspectival thing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the sort of combat between authenticity and accuracy and how these sort of meld together. Definitely. Yeah. It's quite interesting that you talk about the sort of the game developer side and the scholarly side. Has there been sort of a lot of sort of more cooperation, or not cooperation perhaps, but have we seen more attempts from the scholarly side or from the sort of game developer side to try to figure something out in between in recent years, or what sort of developments?
Yeah. So I think the answer is yes, right? I think both scholars, maybe not game study scholars themselves, but people that are studying the past, are very interested in using the techniques from game design, for example, to share the knowledge that they have. And likewise, of course, people that are making games set in history, more and more they understand that there are people out there that are willing to work with them. One of the things is the selection process. So who gets to work with these people making sometimes these multi-million selling games, and are there diverse voices? How's that going on the game developers and game publisher side? The other side of that, of course, is the curatorial process. That's not always the case that academics think I gave input, so it's going to be in the game, right? So there's all sorts of practical things that are being worked out there, but more and more we see that these collaborations are actually happening. And And in that sense, I think just generally across the board, it's a pretty good idea for both game designers, but also for scholars interested in the past to really get an understanding of each other's practices, right? So that's, I think, that's also why this particular interview series and this video series is, I think, very important, because it's just a matter of making those bridges, which there's all sorts of opportunities to make them, but how can we actually make them in practice to mutual benefit? Because this is the same across, the academic fields and the game industry. Is there's a lot of time pressure, so people don't want to spend times, for example, spending hours of design meetings with game designers to get into the nitty-gritty. They just want to share their knowledge and have them do their thing. And the same thing with game designers. They don't necessarily need a whole PhD thesis on a particular subject, and they just need to know, how can we actually put that in our game, right? So this is all, but I'm very hopeful that this is working out better and better, a lot more hopeful than when I first started to get into this field. So 2015, 16, when we started the Value Foundation, one of the real aims was to really try and bridge this gap between industry and academia. And we saw that we've done our share there as well, but we've also seen that it's happening a lot more organically now as well. So that's really hopeful. And I think now it's a matter of putting in place maybe some guardrails and some best practices as examples out there to actually streamline those processes even more.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Our own project is definitely in the sort of same vein of trying to bridge gaps on multiple levels of different fields and disciplines. Going into one of the games that we use as an example, sort of the game Bury Me My Love, which is a game about the Syrian refugee crisis in 2015 by Pixel Art Studios, utilizes sort of a text messaging thread as its sort of main storytelling device with branching paths and multiple endings. And the lead designer, when I was interviewing him, mentioned that this was trying to replicate the sort of feeling of anxiety, of anticipation felt by two individuals separated by thousands of kilometers with only a phone to connect them, and sort of playing on that notion of authenticity that you mentioned. How do you think sort of developers can balance player engagement? So when I say engagement, meaning that they're not that they're drawn into the game, but they're not too disconnected from what's happening, with the sort of the authenticity of experiences like that of refugees.
Yeah, this is the golden question, I think, both, and that's where really we can work together, both of game design and of knowledge dissemination, whether it's coming from academia or somewhere else. That is really it, right? Because, and I think it starts with a game can definitely have a message, and it can definitely be about spreading a certain awareness or knowledge. But the general expectation is, so if you just talk very hypergloss, a game is fun, right? And that's where it has to start. And of course, what fun then actually is in the context, for example, about a game, in a game about refugees, that's of course very contextual, right? There's certain types of fun that you probably don't want to impart on your players, right? Because you don't think that's suitable. And there's other things that are fun, and fun is sometimes a bit of a wrong word here, because obviously I've not had that experience myself, but I've played that game as well. And very little about that experience seems straight up fun, right? As we would sort of naively and intuitively understand it. But fun, I like to think about it as something about care, commitment, and attention. So in a way, how do you get people to care and commit and be attentive to that thing that you want them to experience, right? And games are just very good at that. And there's this thing that you have to do, because one of the things that you have to understand is that certain audiences will think, will commit to certain things with care and attention in different ways. So Bury Me My Love is, I think, for me personally, was a very effective game. Also very smartly done with this distance between it, right? But text-driven games or text-heavy games like this, they're not for everybody, right? So they will be speaking to a particular audience that likes reading, that likes textual engagement. And that's just something that as a game designer, I think you will full know, but it's also something that you have to understand if you're saying, we want to support this as a knowledge sharing, organization, that even there you have to sort of pick your battles, pick your audiences, because not all games are, first of all, suitable for all topics, but not all games appeal to all player audiences.
It's true that this sort of this understanding of the word fun, especially when it comes to video games, especially when it comes to games like Bury Me My Love and sort of the others in sort of genre of reflection, but also understanding or raising awareness. Fun is perhaps not the right word, but it's definitely a sort of an interesting topic to grasp, especially when it comes to games like that. And sort of leading into that, there's certain, when it comes to addressing certain topics with sort of the gravity of the refugee crisis, there are criticisms that have emerged on the commercialization of these events. And, this whole, whether or not, you're meant to make video games on this topic with the whole discussion about whether or not it's fun, even though the original intent of the developers might be one to, spread knowledge or awareness. What are your thoughts on this issue in terms of like a scholarly perspective or in the field of game studies?
Yeah, I think it's very important that we understand as scholars, part of this field is that these are businesses, right? We can think about commercialization and be critical of it all we like, but the reality is that these game making companies, they operate in a global and in many senses very competitive market, right? And not only in the sense of with other games, but also with other attention sinks. So it's a very complex market to be in. And generally speaking, from the scholarly side, we could be pretty naive, right? We are in our ivory towers, not exactly like that anymore, fortunately, but we are in a very different working field and its dynamics. So I think it's very important not to poo-poo the idea of making money of, for example, something that is a message that you personally care about a lot. The question is, of course, the way that money is being made. So a game like Bury Me My Love, when I play it, I can see that this is not some sort of quick cash grab of the experiences of an otherwise poorly represented group of people. I can see that this is I can literally feel, I experience this as a heartfelt attempt to tell a story and to take you on, quite literally, on that journey with you in that story. Oftentimes, this is a personal valuation, right? This is very much where you have to understand that different people experience this past differently. But for example, when I play a Battlefield game or a Call of Duty game, I feel that there's a spectacle going on there, right? As in a Michael Bay movie with lots of explosions and things like that. I think you have to be a bit careful there in terms of the message that actually gets easily drowned by the quite literally violence on the screen. And the violence that the players are also asked to commit, right? And there maybe you want to say, okay, that is a commercialization that I understand. There's a market for that. There's very little that we're going to change about that. But I don't want to be part of that particular process as, but part of my knowledge chain should not be part of that particular process. So I'm just going to step out of that one. Or if you feel that you can make an important contribution to maybe even slightly nudging there, I would be very hesitant about saying, we're going to change the way that Battlefields and Call of Duties work in the world. But maybe if you can even make a small nudge there, very interesting things can happen, right? Even in those spectacle-like commercial projects.
Yeah. The sort of, you bring up certain video games that are sort of violent or portray the past in, ways that are maybe less than ideal in retrospect when it comes to the sort of topics, like the periods that they address. Yeah. There are certain historically based, like, sort of video games. You mentioned Battlefield, but there's others which sort of avoid making references to human rights violations or gloss over them. Especially in like FPS games, you play a soldier, and a lot of what you do sometimes is against a lot of international law. Yeah. And I'm thinking specifically of some like strategy games where a lot of the sort of human experience is glossed over for the sake of sort of making it a sort of a grand strategy. You can always say that, this is a decision by the video game developers to sort of avoid a sort of a polemic reaction. But there are criticisms, I think, that this sort of plays a role in trivializing the sort of experiences in that period and play into certain like revisionist tropes. Do you think that, you know, video game developers, they're not only developers, they're also storytellers. Do you think that they have a responsibility in some way to portray some like loaded historical events or periods in a, you know, accurate or authentic way, as you mentioned?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there is a responsibility there that with game developers as well to tell these stories. In contrast to maybe a couple of years ago, I'm getting more and more hopeful about game developers also taking up that responsibility, particularly within the indie scene. But I think, so that's, you know, smaller game developers, right? I'm also seeing this a little bit more with the bigger game companies, but definitely there's still in the bigger gaming companies, especially in the powerhouses that have been around for a long time. Sid Meier's Civilization is a good example of this. Assassin's Creed, to some extent as well, or, you know, the Battlefields that I just previously spoke of. There's still an idea of, well, we are making an entertainment product, absolutely the case, but that entertainment product, that it carries particular political messages, is sometimes undervalued or sometimes actively moved away from by publishers. For example, you see this at the top level, right? Whatever, these games are made sometimes by thousands of people, and, you know, we don't really know the personal politics and motivations of all these people, but the people that get to say things about these games, like, for example, Sid Meier will happily say, my game about civilization doesn't have a particular political philosophy, right? And that is, in a way, it's a problem. It's not a problem because I don't think that Sid Meier can hold that opinion. It's more a problem because at the same time, we know that there's millions of people playing this game, and we know that it has a particular political philosophy out, and that political philosophy actually ends up influencing quite a bit how people actually perceive these things. There's also, you know, there's of course responsibility with the game makers. I think there's responsibility with the scholars and other people that care about these messages as well, to just make sure that you're part of that conversation as best as we can, right? We obviously don't have the megaphones that, you know, famous game designers or big publishing companies have, but try to be part of the conversation. And players as well, right? They can also be part of this conversation. For example, by not taking at face value the things that the game gives you. And a lot of players are not doing that either, right? So there's lots of people that play around with a game like Civilization. For example, they will try to make a pacifist run to sort of go against this idea of endless competition. There's other ways that, for example, people hack or modify games that they actually are starting to do something else than the game originally intended. There's all sorts of things that you can actually become part of this big conversation that we're having. And I think maybe that's the big underlying responsibility. This is a conversation that we're all having, even though we don't know it, when we're playing in the comfort of our own home or on the way to work, on the metro or whatever. We are actually part of this large conversation about the past and about the world around us when we are immersing ourselves in these playful time machines.
Great. Yeah, it's very nice that you sort of highlighting the improvements or the sort of hope that you have for not only the industry, but also the way that the sort of knowledge sharing is occurring within it. To sort of wrap up, you know, we've talked about video games, we've talked about their sort of cultural and sort of social aspects. Do you think that video games can play a larger role, or even should play a larger role in addressing certain sort of, yeah, collective memory of society on certain events? Like, you know, we've mentioned the refugee crisis, but there's also other games that, you know, this project addresses, which go around the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think games are already playing a pretty large role. And this is one of the things that my Playful Time Machines project is trying to get also a basic understanding of, both the quantitative nature of how big this impact is, as well as the qualitative nature. Together with that, I think moving forward, I think games will not diminish in terms of cultural importance. And to even sort of have a futuristic glasses on, you can also see how elements of games are moving into potential future developments when it comes to or online spaces. For example, the idea of the metaverse, right, of virtual online connected worlds. There you can see that game-like elements are already very much a part of it. And obviously, you can also already see in the messaging there that the past and how we experience it is already part of those platforms as well, right? When Mark Zuckerberg talks about the metaverse, there's almost always in every video, there's like a Roman pillar somewhere in the background, for example, because that's also what Mark Zuckerberg likes in terms of pasts, right? And I think really we cannot understate how, even if you're not into games yourself as a scholar, or as a member of as a general citizen, that a lot of people are, in fact, and these games are very, very influential, both on a personal and as on a societal, cultural level, in the way that we collectively view the world. So it's definitely something I think we have to spend quite a bit of attention on, and I'm very happy I got the chance to do that together with you today.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Mol, for this very interesting interview. Yeah, it's really amazing to see that these sort of projects or these attempts are occurring, as you mentioned, like organically. We hadn't heard about your playful time machines when we started our own project, so it's very nice to see that there is sort of this knowledge-driven willingness to blend together disciplines and bring people together to talk about this in a constructive way. So thank you.
No, absolutely, my pleasure. Yeah, it's really great. Thank you for inviting me. I think it's really important that because a lot of this is happening organically, it's really important that we do try to connect to each other. And you often find that people have very similar interests and aims as well. And I found generally a very good community or sense of community and purpose behind both the scholarship and the game making in this particular interface of things. So yeah, great. I wish you the best. I'm really looking forward to the end result of this series of interviews as well.
Thank you.